Big, it's the way to go. Eat a fig, not a pig, let your kindness show. If it's your wig or a jig or a swig, do you dig? Big, it's the way to go. It's Big Fat Vegan Radio.
When something's fat, there's a lot to show. It's gotta be fat to help the movement grow. Making fat loud chat that won't be flat. It's that. And here's our show. It's Big Fat Vegan Radio.
I've just got that vegan glow, like a drag queen calling Patrick Goudreau. I'm a YouTube vegan cooking up good eating. Veganism makes me glow. It's Big Fat Vegan Radio.
All right, vegans, all together now. When something's fat, there's a lot to show. It's gotta be fat to help the movement grow. Making fat loud chat that won't be flat. It's that.
It's the
And
way
here's
to
our
go.
show. It's Big Fat Vegan Radio.
Hey everyone, welcome to Big Fat Vegan Radio. We're podcasting from East Coast to West Coast to discuss veganism in all of its glory. I am Ben Strothman, otherwise known as Honey LeBronx, everyone's favorite vegan drag queen. I am here without my co-host Laura Yaz, vegan writer and entertainment know-it-all. You can check us out on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube by searching for Big Fat Vegan Radio. And you can also follow along with our show notes at bigfatveganradio.com. Today, I have a very special interview with my guest, David Karopkin, the founder of GooseWatch NYC. Now, we've discussed GooseWatch a couple of times on the show, but today, David's going to tell us a bit more about the organization and how he got it started and where they're at today. David Karopkin was born and raised in NYC. That means New York City. He founded GooseWatch NYC in 2011 to call attention to New York City's policy of killing Canada geese in public parks, and he works to protect urban wildlife. David is currently a second-year student at Brooklyn Law School. And without any further ado, let's welcome David to the show. David Karopkin, welcome to Big Fat Vegan Radio.
Oh, thank you.
So excited to have you on the show. You know, we've been talking about you and your organization, GooseWatch NYC, for a while now on the show. And I think this is a really interesting time to discuss your work and what's going on in New York City. Could you start by telling us, how did you get involved in animal issues?
Okay, so my personal story, after I graduated college, actually my sister gave me a couple of animal rights books to read and made me aware of some cruelty to animals on a very broad scale that I had never really understood before. And I was pretty upset that I had made my way through 12 years of education without ever thinking about this. And I tried veganism right away, and I started to volunteer at, try to find different animal causes to volunteer in. I got involved as a volunteer at Woodstock Animal Sanctuary upstate, and New York Class in New York City was an organization I started as a volunteer at because I'd come across a book called How to Get Political for Animals and Win the Laws They Need, which talked about the need for animal advocates to become politically active, and I had already been, had some experience doing campaigns and things like that, so I was very attracted to that idea. So those were kind of the initial ways that I became an animal advocate, and then, the killing of the geese happened in 2010, and my attention kind of just turned right onto that issue.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And then on July 8th, 2010, something sort of pivotal took place that took you in a new direction with your activism. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, what happened, as your listeners may or may not know, in Prospect Park, which is a very large park in Brooklyn, there was a mass slaughter of more than 300 geese. The community was surprised by this. We basically went to the park every day thinking, everything was A-okay, and one day all of these geese were gone, and the public was very concerned and upset and didn't know what to do about it or who to talk to about it. And initially the park kind of denied that anything had happened. They said that the geese flew away, actually, which people figured out couldn't have been true because it's during the summer and they're molting, which means that they don't have flight feathers and they have babies that they're raising. And, this big thing started to unravel, and we found out that the city had, Mike Bloomberg had taken out a contract with USDA Wildlife Services, which is this national federal agency that basically profits killing, nuisance animals. And we also found out that, although they were doing things like this across the country for a variety of reasons, because geese poop a lot and people, get upset about that, so they have them killed. We didn't know this. And we also didn't know that, the reason that Mayor Bloomberg said that it was the Miracle on the Hudson that was the justification for wiping out these geese in Prospect Park, as well as, hundreds and thousands of other geese in other parks in New York City that they decided were too close to any airports.
Could you just refresh our memories for people who don't know what the Miracle on the Hudson was?
Sure. So in January of 2009, this was a very major news story, which was that Sully Sullenberger was the captain of an airplane that took off out of LaGuardia Airport, and a couple of thousand feet as they were going into the air, they hit a flock of geese, and these kinds of bird strikes, as they call them, happen every single day, but some of them, as this one showed, can cause substantial damage to the airplane, and they lost power in both engines, and Captain Sullenberger landed the plane in the middle of the Hudson River, which saved everybody's life on board of that airplane, and also was just a huge news story. And immediately there was a lot of negative press on, the New York Post ran a cover story with geese in a kind of a target bullseye, and everybody started yelling about how we have to kill the geese.
Yeah. I got it. It sounds like something out of like The Hunchback of Notre Dame or some angry mob in a Disney movie or something.
Yeah, it was kind of surreal, and those of us who were looking for answers and trying to be, not just animal advocates about it, but just reasonable and trying to get, our heads around what the situation was and why, when it was so obvious to us that it was unnecessary. The geese in Prospect Park is 9 miles away from the nearest airport, and we were told that they were only rounding up geese within 7 miles of the airport, which even that seems pretty absurd and doesn't seem, from a logical standpoint, let alone scientific, to seem like it would be a good way of dealing with bird strikes.
Yeah.
So.
There's a quote of yours that I love, and I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but you were quoted as saying, "I made a decision I wasn't going to be in my bed when the USDA came back to Prospect Park." And I love that, something motivated you to take action and realize that, hey, I may just be one person, but, I can do something about this. I can have an impact.
Well, that's basically what started everything, because after the first roundup in 2010, the community was galvanized. We had dozens, if not hundreds of people coming out to 3 separate vigils and protests and events that we had trying to show support for the geese, and there were meetings that we had with park officials trying to prevent a roundup from happening again in Prospect Park. We weren't even thinking about how to deal with all of the other parks across New York City that geese had been rounded up in. And we got all the way around to April of the next year of 2011 and had not received any kind of confirmation or guarantee that the geese that were in Prospect Park that summer, and mind you, there were 300 geese, it was 368 geese that were killed in the summer of 2010. The New York Times had a story that 6 weeks later there were already 100+ geese back in the park because they fly and they move around. And by the next summer, the number was at 36. And they had boiled eggs to prevent more geese from being born in the park, and yet there was what we called miracle goslings. We had one nest hatch, and there were 6 babies that we were trying to protect. And at that point, we were very concerned about what was going to happen to all of these birds. And 36 was kind of in this middle range where the park didn't seem sure that the USDA was going to steer clear of the park or not. So that's where that came in. Your quote that the quote that you mentioned, I live about a mile from Prospect Park. I've been going to the park my whole life since I was a kid. One of the things that was so troubling for me the prior summer was that this happened in the middle of the night and nobody had been given any prior notice, any, request for input. I mean, nobody in the community was asked about, how we felt about this. And we weren't given the opportunity. A lot of the news stories tried to spin, the killing as euthanasia and humane. And I was saying, prove it. Let us. These are government officials coming into public parks using taxpayer dollars to remove the wild animals. We're entitled to some photographs, some video. At the very least, the press should be telling both sides of this story, and that's really what prompted me to start GooseWatch. And I basically, as you said, there was a strong group of people who worked together for almost a year after the first slaughter in Prospect Park. And I reached out to them and I said, I've been sitting on the sidelines a little bit, watching you guys try to fight to protect these geese in Prospect Park the second summer. I spent a lot of that time, playing a supportive role and just learning about the issue. And I stepped up at that time and said, I can't necessarily do this alone, but, if enough of you and I work together and we can take shifts and we can basically ensure that we're at the park 24 hours a day for the next 6 weeks, and if the USDA comes back, we'll have them on photographs. And press got word that we were doing that, despite my intentions and efforts to try to keep that knowledge, a secret, because my concern was that the park is very big and the USDA would find another way in and, work around us. And I don't want to have our cover blown, but it was, and it turned out to be for our benefit because there was a lot of media attention on what we were doing. And the USDA didn't come back to Prospect Park in 2011, and they said that there were, a low enough number of geese to warrant not doing a roundup there, but we've got the records, and they've rounded up, they rounded up 8 geese or 12 geese in other parks in New York City that summer. So we found it pretty hard to believe that, the only reason they didn't come back to Prospect Park was because there was like a low enough number of geese. And, there was also some debate because one of the things, that did get accomplished that year, even though we didn't ever get a guarantee that they weren't going to do a roundup in the summer of 2011, they formed a wildlife management task force in Prospect Park, which included the Audubon Society, the Humane Society, and these groups wanted to work on implementing, egg oiling and border collie use to try to lower the number of geese in the park and prevent another roundup from happening. And so there were some people who, didn't really think that it was what we were doing that had prevented the roundup. It was the humane management techniques. And that's kind of what led into the, basically that is the open question that led me to really take GooseWatch citywide, because, there were dozens of parks where they had done roundups in, and, literally over 100 parks that the USDA had on a document that they had gone to survey and see how many geese were there and whether or not they should, make that particular site a roundup site. And so between 2011 and 2012, we worked as a group and we scattered out parks all across the city where there were geese in close proximity to where people lived. And our goal was to try to find parks in every single borough where we could have people watch for the USDA. And if a roundup was in progress, we could, we had also amassed a large email list and phone contact list, and I had Subscribe for Technology that let me make one phone call that went out to like 500 different phone numbers in the city, so that if people wanted to come out and try to, help take photographs or, whatever it was that they wanted to do at the site, I mean, I felt that they had the right to be there. So that's what we spent that year doing, and we took in the summer of 2012 8 parks.
You said 8 parks?
Yeah, 8 parks.
Yeah, that was part of what I wanted to ask you, is just about how you pretty much answered that for me, but I wanted to give the people an idea of how GooseWatch works. I found it really impressive, being on the list. When I would get the calls or I would get the mass texts from you, it just seems really, really admirable how you harnessed, technology to get the entire community involved in this, and to make it very easy for people to participate and very easy for people to stay informed of what's going on. I think that's great. I'd also be interested in, so we've heard a bit about how GooseWatch works. I would love for our listeners to get to hear a little bit about why the roundups don't work. In your opinion, why is the other than the fact that, of course, it's cruel and inhumane, in your opinion, why is the rounding up and killing of the geese not effective at preventing another airstrike?
Well, specifically with regards to the airstrike issue, the bird strike issue, I don't see how there's any way that killing birds year after year is a long-term solution. Now, mind you, we've not, as a society, been killing birds for air safety reasons for that long. It's been 20 years, although it does go back further institutionally in New York City. The the bird strike database only goes back to 1990. And the contract with the USDA for New York City parks is 5 or 6 years old, and killing of birds around the airport maybe goes back 10 or 15 years. But one of the things that I've seen is that in New York City, at least, no matter how many geese the USDA kills, and I've got all the numbers from every year that they've rounded up geese in parks, and we're trying to get the documents that show how many animals that they've killed on JFK and LaGuardia properties and other airports in the region, and we have some of that information. And the long and the short of it is, it doesn't matter how many geese or other birds they kill, if they're not going to kill every single bird in the sky, and they're not going to change the habitat around the airports, and they're not going to change the technology that we put into the air. And by the way, mind you that, there are a lot of reasons to fear for flying. I mean, flying is one of the safest ways to travel, but it's also potentially very dangerous. And there's a lot of things that could go wrong. And bird strikes represent less than 1% of the things that can go wrong in an airplane. And yet every time there's a bird strike and it makes the news, people get very upset and they want to know what we're doing about the problem. And politically, it's expedient to say, hey, we're going to go kill a lot of birds. But what's really difficult, I think, is to make the investment and, figure out what kind of a long-term technological strategy we're going to use and implement in our airports. And mind you, in Israel also, the understanding is that they've reduced, and Israel is on an international migratory bird path. They have between 500,000 and 1 million birds fly through twice a year through their airspace, and they've reduced the number of bird strikes by 75 or 80% using this kind of radar technology. But we're not doing that here. Why? I'm not really sure. There's a political answer, a financial answer, and there's just the idea that killing birds is somehow going to make us safer, and that persists because there's a lot of money involved in that, and the birds can't fight back. But the other thing that I would say is that, I've also got countless documented examples of, I think I just mentioned this, when you wipe out a lot of birds and you've got a vacant desirable habitat, we've seen time and time again that area gets repopulated. You can't kill your way out of, having a desirable habitat have lights on it. It's not feasible.
Yeah. Especially when you have millions of birds that have been observing that migratory path for how many ages now? I mean, it's just not going to stop overnight because you killed them one day.
I mean, we could probably debate at length the scientific justifications that the USDA and the FAA and other entities are using to say, hey, we've killed birds and the number of bird strikes has maybe held steady or gone down. And the relationship that has to killing birds is debatable at length. But they seem to feel that this is a necessary component, and they also try to talk about, the non-lethal strategies that they've employed. But they say, hey, we only want to kill birds when we have to, and we use non-lethal strategies, but we don't see any of that. We're not. So the only thing that we're left to believe is that killing is their primary strategy. And as we saw with the snowy owl incident that just happened in New York City, I mean, killing first was their first response, even though Logan Airport in Boston has in place a trap and release program for snowy owls. The Port Authority went straight for the shotguns.
Can you tell us about the snowy owl incident?
Yeah, I mean, just so your listeners understand, geese are actually relatively low on the list of animals that collide with airplanes on takeoff and landing. Gulls are much higher. Rodents and rabbits and other animals attract birds of prey into the airfields. And owls are one of those birds. And this year, snowy owls, which don't usually come this far south, came into New York airspace unexpectedly for the first time, I think, in 2 years. But overall, it's a sporadic incident that snowy owls make their way into the New York City region. And I got a phone call. It was a Sunday night from the Daily News. They were going to run a story the next morning. They had a breaking story that the Port Authority had shot 3 snowy owls. And the only way they even knew about it, from my understanding, is somebody on the inside of the Port Authority, let them know about that because they were upset about it. Somebody on the inside is upset about what happened. You really got a problem, right?
Yeah.
And on Monday, when the story broke, there was a lot of heat and attention on the issue. The Audubon Society got involved very quickly, wrote a strong worded letter. Friends of Animals got involved, and was on numerous TV broadcasts. Trying to get this point across that the Port Authority most likely broke the law and they filed a lawsuit. Basically there was a huge outpouring of support to say, we shouldn't be killing snowy owls. There's alternatives. And by the end of the day on Monday, the Port Authority issued a statement that they were no longer going to shoot snowy owls in New York City. They were going to trap and release them. And in my estimation, nothing changed between Sunday when they were shooting snowy owls and Monday night when they decided it was no longer necessary. And it speaks very loudly to me that they were able to do this. And obviously it helps that there's an alternative ready to go, which is, relocating these snowy owls. But it speaks very loudly to me that, if there's a will to, implement alternatives and non-lethal strategies, there's a way.
Yeah.
One
of the things that seems so ridiculous to me is that, as I'm sure you've heard, there was a lot of evidence with the Miracle on the Hudson that, yeah, sure, they collided with a flock of birds, but that's not necessarily what brought the plane down. That there was all sorts of things that were faulty on the plane, all sorts of safety checks that were not in place. Could you tell us any more about that?
Well, I'll tell you this. Now, the National Transportation Safety Board was in charge of doing a full investigation. They released a report. It was more than 200 pages, and it does discuss some potential issues and precautions that could have been taken that would have perhaps raised red flags. There was a CNN article that said that 2 days prior to the Miracle on the Hudson, that exact aircraft, piloted by a different pilot on the same exact route, had to make an emergency landing because of engine trouble. It wasn't a very old aircraft, I think about 10 years old, which is, I think, relatively young for planes. Although if you think about having a 10-year-old car, I mean, technology does, need upgrades periodically. But be that as it may, 33 specific recommendations were included in that report, and most of them focused on ways that airplane manufacturers and airline companies and airports could either modify what's on the airplane to make them more obvious to birds, either by putting like lighting strips, changing the volume levels on the engines. There's a lot of technical ideas that were included in the recommendation section, but what stood out to me is that only one of the recommendations even mentioned, and it wasn't like a prescription to go out and kill a lot of birds. It says, you should look at wildlife hazard management. And killing birds could be on the table, but it wasn't a prescription to go kill birds. And I think the report overall basically emphasized that the industry and the regulators could be doing a lot more on their end, besides for taking this, approach towards mitigating risk to, bird strikes by killing birds, haphazardly and in an unscientific manner. There's definitely a lot of questions that persist and continue to persist about the causes of bird strikes and the contributing factors, and again, speak to why I don't think that killing birds is a long-term strategy. Like, we need another, way that we're going to deal with this issue, regardless of the ethics of the issue.
And especially if killing birds or just monitoring our wildlife activity and hazards in the area was one of the 33 recommendations, I would really love to hear what we're doing about the other 32 recommendations. It just seems like that's the thing Bloomberg picked up and ran with. Like, oh, here is how we can appease the angry mob who wants answers. It just makes me think of this play that I saw. I think it was called The Pillow Man. It was just some play with Billy Crudup was in it, and what's the guy from Jurassic Park? Jeff Goldblum. And there's some guy who's on trial for some murder, and you start to realize through the play that most likely he didn't do it, but at the end they shoot him in the back of the head. And I don't know, capital punishment freaks me out, even talking about it or hearing about it. And I remember I asked a friend of mine who I saw the show with, like, why did they have to kill him? And he's like, well, because the public is angry. There's a mob mentality, and they just want something done. They want someone killed. They want blood spilled. They want to know as quickly as they can that, all right, the situation's been fixed, so that they can go to sleep knowing that this will never happen again. And killing geese gives us absolutely no guarantee that it's not going to happen again. And you point to a country like Israel that's lowered their incidence of bird strikes by 75 to 80%. I'd feel much safer at night knowing that that's what our leadership in this city is leaning towards, is putting in place a solution that has worked for other places.
And a National Geographic article that came out about a month and a half ago quoted Sully Sullenberger, the captain from the Miracle on the Hudson, who essentially said, what happened to us could happen again tomorrow. In 5 or 6 years since that incident, the city has accomplished nothing by killing birds.
Wow.
Literally.
Yeah. So can you tell us, it's been about 3.5 years almost that GooseWatch has been around? Could you tell us, how has GooseWatch been effective? What have you guys been able to do in terms of actually saving lives and stopping roundups?
Well, I'll tell you what we've done, and you and your audience will judge how effective we've been at saving lives and changing the discourse and what direction that we should go in, because it's a very, complex and difficult issue. And, I found it, it's easy to come at this from a pure animal advocate perspective and animal rights perspective, and I do believe it's wrong to kill these birds, and it's cruel, it's not humane, and it's not right that we're using that private or public money and effort should go to killing birds for either because they're on occasion, and literally, I mean, like 0.16% bringing down, not even bringing down airplanes. It's such a minuscule percentage of the time that, you have to ask yourself, would you kill 1,000 birds to save one human life? Some people would say maybe. Would you kill 10,000 birds? Would you kill 1 million birds? Would you kill every single bird to save one human life? And then we could talk about poop on golf courses. So anyway, I say all that by way of introduction and saying that we have to be smart about this issue, in my opinion, because we're going up against the government and we're going up against science and industry, and they're entrenched. They've got at least a 15-year head start on the data and the advocacy and the lobbying, and they clearly have been very successful. They won Mayor Mike Bloomberg over. A lot of people consider him one of the most powerful people in the world. A mega billionaire. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand sent me a letter saying that as much as she cares about animals, they've got to go. she fully supported the roundup of geese at Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge, which is a total breach on the sanctity of that geographic area. Wildlife refuge in New York City has been tainted by multiple roundups of Canada geese there. So all of that said, what GooseWatch has done, I think there's a couple of issues that I focused on, and we've as a group tried to address. The first one is the transparency issue. I mean, this goes back to, and we talked about this when I started GooseWatch, was because we weren't feeling that there was even a sufficient conversation about this issue. We weren't asked. We weren't notified. We were completely left out of the decision-making process. And at the end of the day, I mean, these are federal agents that use taxpayer money and go into our parks. We have a right to know what they look like. And we have a right to defend our parks. And we have a right to defend the animals that live in our parks. And we have a right to advocate for them. And we have a right to videotape what's going on in our parks. And that's what we wanted to do. And that's what we accomplished this year. We spent 3 summers camping out in parks trying to document the roundup of geese and what more could be done. And you have to understand how difficult it is. I mean, mind you, we hoped, on the one hand, that by staking out at a park for 6 weeks when the geese can't fly and their goslings are there, I mean, you have to imagine, first of all, how fearful it is, because we were there for maybe 6 or 8 hours a day, some parks. And you would spend the next 12 or 15 hours hoping that when you got back there the next day, the geese were still there. Because our volunteers were doing this on their spare time, after work, before work, and really putting in all hours of the day just with the hope of being able to protect these birds. And if they were rounded up, being able to document it. And in almost every single instance of a park where we did that, where we spent literally weeks on end trying to be there, those parks got skipped over. Because we did make public which parks we were going to be doing the stakeouts at. We wanted them to know, because we made that flip decision after the first summer, and we tried to keep our efforts a secret, and they got out despite our efforts to keep it a secret, which ended up being good for us in terms of being able to get the word out and having some success at preventing the USDA from coming back to Prospect Park. That's what we tried to do. And although overwhelmingly the parks that we did the stakeouts at were not hit by USDA agents, for the first time this summer, last summer I got a couple of calls like, a couple of days ago I saw a roundup. Where were you? At a golf course in Queens. Which one? I don't know. Do you have any video footage? No. This year, the first roundup that I got wind of, somebody sent me a text message at 7:30 in the morning from Inwood Park on a late June morning. I got an emergency call out, and a couple of people from the Inwood community who are on our list got down to the park and were able to get photographs of the roundup. And we got that out to the press immediately, and the Daily News was on it. And then later that day, we got even more photos from a second roundup that they did later that afternoon. So by virtue of having done 3 years of work spreading out and letting people know that we were doing this, I was getting, for the first time this summer, I was aware of roundup as they were happening. And that felt pretty important. And we were able to get photos, not always videos, until July 2nd, which I believe was the date that I got a call from Jeffrey Kramer, who was on patrol at Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge, and told me that he saw USDA trucks going in. And I had just left my apartment. I was dressed in a suit. I was on my way to work. I got in my girlfriend's car. I went to Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge, and I found the USDA rounding up the geese, and I videotaped them. And that's on the website, and that footage has been used on a lot of media websites. Jane Velez Mitchell used the footage also on HLN and CNN. So, that thrust of just bringing the transparency and we didn't waste time also. A lot of the time that we were in the park, we had flyers on us, and we would talk to people in the park and ask them, hey, are you, if we saw somebody walking their dog, do you come here a lot? Can you take our phone number down? If you see anything, can you call us? Check out the website. Here's some information. And just trying to, while we were there, inform people that the birds that they were looking at like me, they're taking for granted potentially. Mm-hmm. I took them for granted. So that's one of the ways that we did this, is by staking out, camping out in these parks, in neighborhood community parks predominantly, parks where from across the street there are apartment buildings or houses. And there's a lot of parks like this in New York City. You'd be surprised. Yeah. I've lived in New York City my whole life, and I've been to more parks in the past 3 years than in my whole life combined. And there are so many amazing parks that I never knew about in New York City. Yeah. And there's a lot of them that have wildlife, including geese. And it's really overwhelming, actually.
I feel a bit naive, not even having realized that they were actually rounding up wildlife at a wildlife refuge. That just absolutely blows my mind.
It's mind-blowing.
Yeah. So a question for you, today is day 2 of Mayor Bill DeBlasio, which I'm so excited about, as the last couple of years have just been spent doing everything we can to make sure that I'll just say it, to make sure that we didn't have someone who's very bad news for animals becoming our mayor. And, and already Bill DeBlasio is insistent that the horse-drawn carriage industry is going to be phased out. And, and now there is the potential for a new city council speaker. There is a lot of talk about Kristen Mark Viverito, that she is very, very animal-friendly, that she's the first one to actually, that she was one of the sponsors of the bill to ban the horse carriage industry, and is a very animal-friendly, progressive Democrat who would be great news on our city council. This could be a real winning team for the animals. Does this give you any hope that maybe someone like DeBlasio might have a more sensible plan, or at least might be more open to calling off the roundups? Well,
I'm definitely hopeful that we'll be able to have a real conversation about changing things. In New York City, as you alluded to, for many, many years, we've had leadership that said no to making reforms that helped and made things better for animals. And for the first time in decades, probably, we have a mayor now, and hopefully a speaker of the city council, and Melissa Mark Viverito, or if it's Dan Garodnick, who also has been open to hearing about some of these issues. And in general, the city council is more progressive. And I think for the first time we have an opportunity. We have somebody who's willing to have the conversation and willing to look at the issue with a fresh perspective. Mayor Mike Bloomberg really, I think, did a disservice to the issue the way he basically described when this first came out as, being between, he said it's a choice between geese and human beings, and I can tell you where I come out on that one, and then he said that the geese go to sleep and have nice dreams and it's not a big deal, and I'm paraphrasing, but those quotes are online. And what Bill DeBlasio said as a candidate was that, yes, we have to protect air safety, and I don't think anybody would dispute that, but, the killing of the geese in Prospect Park was, an outrage and did not, comport with what, we should be doing to protect airline passengers. And I definitely am hopeful that, that he will follow through on his agenda to make the reforms to the animal issues that have already captured his attention, and to also allow us to have some dialogue on this issue, and beat back the killing of these birds in New York City parks especially. People in New York City have come to know these animals and appreciate them, and after years of killing, I think people are ready to see an end to that. There are humane ways of resolving the conflicts that may arise, and I think that we have a very strong set of evidence. We've been working with aviation experts. We've got a very well-respected and knowledgeable coalition of people that can come and meet with not only, the administration, but a whole range of different parties and stakeholders, and try to explain why it's time now to take another look at what's going on and try to do things differently. I don't expect that the mayor will say, let's stop killing all birds right now. I don't think that's reasonable to expect. I think that we can do it. But we need to get that message out. We need to get it across that the alternatives exist, that they should be implemented. That these alternatives need to be put into place so that we can start to really protect the wildlife that we have in our park and appreciate them in a way that we haven't been able to under Mayor Mike Bloomberg.
So, David, for those listening in and out of the New York City area, how can people get involved and support your work?
Well, it's a very good question. I mean, I think, first of all, if you're listening to this, just know that wherever you are, one of the things that I've learned from watching not just what's happened with geese and other wildlife in New York City, but in other places around the country and around the world, frankly, if people are complaining about the birds or other animals, it's time to start organizing, because the animals do not have the law on their side. And many times, it's easy for a politician to get up and say, the solution to whatever problems you're having with whether it's geese or deer or coyotes or whatever the animal is to spend taxpayer money and try to kill them. And that's good for a very small amount of people, but that's not good overall for it's not good for the animals, and it's not good for the community, because usually the killing programs don't work. And what we've seen is that USDA Wildlife Services, which does a lot of the killing, literally they go from jurisdiction to jurisdiction around the country soliciting contracts. We've seen them say, "Oh, you have a lot of geese in this pond near you. We noticed. If you pay us, we'll kill them for you." And they do this without community input, and they act very, quickly at times to get paid and kill animals. And they do it under the radar. A lot of people don't know about this, and we see the newspaper articles come in. Towns find out after the fact. They're very upset. They're upset that the animals were killed. They're upset that they were left out of the decision-making process. And really, in a big way, this calls for just being an active participant in your local democracy, because, these are decisions that get made locally for the most part. Even, with regards to New York City, which is it's the biggest city in America, it's not the USDA coming in and saying, we're going to come kill your geese and there's nothing you can do about it. The municipality has to agree to this and pay for it. So, if a particular group of people, or if a jurisdiction, or if a municipality, or a city, or a town, or a county is talking about this, and you have enough people who are against paying for the killing of wildlife in where you live, you can be successful. And we've had success this year in Westchester and in Long Island and other places, and that's because of being able to organize early on and not wait until the decision has already been made. And if you're in New York City, if you're in New York City, definitely just reach out to me directly, first of all, and find I'd love to work with you and find a way on how you can contribute, because there's really, no one set prescribed way that people can help. But there's a lot of different ways that people can help, and I have some info on the website, whether it's just, monitoring the park near where you live and sending me an update. How many geese are there on a particular day? Send a photo. Talk to your neighbors. We've got flyers. We've got postcards. We want you to reach out to your elected officials and let them know that this is an issue that matters to you, and that in general you want, clean parks, and you want more park space, and more park space not just for people. We've seen a lot more park space get created in New York City during Mayor Bloomberg's administration. I don't know if the exact numbers, but to me it seems a lot of that park space is not for animals. There are, there's Fort Freedom Park on Roosevelt Island, a beautiful new park where until it was finished construction, there was a family of geese living on that tip of Roosevelt Island. And after the park was finished, there was a family of geese at the top of the stairs in that park at a tree that was a newly planted tree with just 4 feet by 4 feet of soil around, in a concrete park. And that's where the family of geese decided to nest, and they had babies. And, we had to argue with the management of that park to provide them, with some space to let them live, because, in that case, it was very clear they were there before the park was. And building the park did not they didn't go somewhere else. They stayed there. And, just broadly speaking, like we really need to advocate for having room for these animals and how we're going to coexist. And, a lot of times people have a mentality, not animal advocates usually, but people in general just have this perspective that the parks are for people. And if there's goose poop in a park, that is a problem. Well, is it really such a problem? I've been to a lot of parks in New York City, and I have not been to one park, literally. I challenge anybody who is listening to this, I challenge anybody in New York City to show me a park that has a goose poop problem that does not have a garbage problem.
Exactly. And I don't hear the same people arguing about the horse poop problem that literally goes way outside the parks and it goes all over the city.
So just to summarize, what you can do to help is just get involved, learn the issues. I have a lot of information on the GooseWatch website. There's a lot of organizations that work on this, and I've got a lot of them listed on the website, and there's a lot of different perspectives out there. You don't have to, just hear it from my mouth. There's people who've been working on this issue for a very long time and have a lot of different, areas of expertise that they bring to the table when it comes to this issue, and I've been very grateful to meet so many different, people who care about this issue and come at it from so many different angles and understand that, we are dealing with, it's something of a crisis. I mean, we are already, as it is, devoid of a relationship with wildlife and nature, and the little bit that we have left is expendable to too many people.
Amen. Yeah, there is such a lack of nature in New York City, and when you go to one of these parks, it's just such a miracle, such a breath of fresh air to have some green space and to have some interaction with wildlife, and to lose that, would really be to lose the most of the nature that we have in this city at all. People can always check you out at GooseWatchNYC.com. And, of course, there is a button on the top of the website that says how you can help. So if people click that, they can get involved in the Emergency Alert Network. They can donate to help support their work. There's a lot that you guys can do to get involved. So check out GooseWatchNYC.com. And, David, how can people reach you?
Send me an email, goosewatching@gmail.com.
Goosewatching?
Or David at GooseWatch. Or if you find it easier to remember, David at GooseWatchNYC.com.
David at GooseWatchNYC.com.
Yeah.
Or
sorry.
or Goosewatching.
Exactly.
At gmail.com.
Yeah.
Excellent. David, thank you so much for joining us today. Best of luck with GooseWatch.
Thank you, Ben. Really appreciate that. Your support means a lot to me. I thank you.
Excellent. Thanks much. Now, is that an awesome activist or what? There you have it, people. There is one person who decided he was going to make a difference, that he wasn't going to take this fight laying down. And David, thank you so much for all that you do for the animals. You can check out GooseWatch at GooseWatchNYC.com, and be sure to click on How You Can Help for How You Can Help. And as always, some shameless plugs here. You guys can always call us at 315-VEGAN-01. That's 315-834-2601. We love hearing from you guys. Love putting voicemails in our episodes. You can also email us at bigfatveganradio@gmail.com. And don't forget, our fundraiser is still going on until January 15th. Some of the proceeds are going towards Poplar Spring Animal Sanctuary, and you can contribute by going to tinyurl.com/BFVR support, or just go to bigfatveganradio.com and click on Support Us for a list of ways you can help us do what we do, even some that cost nothing. You can always follow Laura and I as individuals on the Twitter and the Instagram. We are at HoneyLaBronx and at Lara Yaz. While you're at it, check out our YouTube pages. You can check out Laura at youtube.com/Lara Yaz. That's LARAYAZ. And you can check out my Vegan Drag Queen cooking show at vegandragqueen.com. You can also buy some of Honey LaBronx's famous medieval oil at medieval oil, medieval.com. That's medieval oil.com. I have to say it because even I always forget how to spell medieval. A shout out to our friends, Michael Herron. You can check his work at michaelherron.com. He, of course, is the artist who gave you our wonderful intro theme song. And Kelly Huffine, who gave you our logo and cartoons. She is kelly42fox.deviantart.com. And that, I believe, is all we have for this episode of Big Fat Vegan Radio. Please subscribe to us through iTunes or your podcatcher of choice. It's extra helpful if you can give us an awesome rating and a glowing review. And be sure to let us know what you thought of this episode on our Facebook page. Send us a tweet, leave us a voicemail, or leave us a comment at bigfatveganradio.com. We always love hearing from you guys. Thank you very much. And since it's a new year, I'm going to try something new. If you guys could go vegan!